The security footage from Riverside Mall would later show exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds between the moment 12-year-old Alex Morrison realized he was alone and the moment everything changed. What it couldn't capture was the sound of his racing heartbeat, or the way his fingers trembled as he reached out into empty space where his father's hand should have been. In those 4 minutes, a bond would form between two strangers that would reshape both their lives forever, proving that sometimes the people who save us are the ones who need saving most. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Rodriguez had been invisible for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to matter. 3 years of working the overnight shift at DataFlow Solutions, 3 years of dropping his 8-year-old daughter Emma at school before crawling into bed while other fathers were starting their workdays, 3 years of existing in the spaces between other people's lives. His divorce had stripped away more than just his marriage. It had taken his confidence, his sense of purpose, everything except his fierce love for Emma and his determination to prove he could be the father she deserved. That Saturday afternoon at Riverside Mall, Marcus was doing what he always did on his weekends with Emma, stretching his paycheck as far as it would go while trying to make their time together feel special. Emma had been eyeing an art set at Creative Corner for weeks, and he'd finally saved enough to surprise her. She was at the food court with her best friend's family, giving him 30 minutes to make the purchase and wrap it before her birthday dinner that evening. The art supply store was tucked between a jewelry shop and a high-end clothing boutique in the mall's upper level, stores that Marcus normally avoided because they reminded him of everything he couldn't afford anymore. He was counting crumpled bills at the register when he heard it, a voice calling out with increasing desperation, young and scared and trying so hard to stay calm. "Dad? Dad, where are you?" Marcus turned to see a boy standing frozen near the fountain in the central atrium, one hand gripping a white cane, the other extended tentatively in front of him. The kid was maybe 12, well dressed in the kind of clothes that screamed private school, but his composure was cracking. His head moved in careful sweeps, listening for familiar sounds in the chaos of weekend mall noise. "Dad, please answer me," the boy called again, and Marcus felt his chest tighten. He knew that particular brand of fear, the kind that came from being small and lost and trying to convince yourself that panic wouldn't help anything. The cashier was still processing Marcus's payment, but he couldn't look away from the boy. Shoppers moved around him like water around a stone, some glancing with sympathy but no one stopping. A security guard was talking into his radio 20 feet away, but his attention was focused on a group of teenagers near the GameStop. The boy's breathing was getting faster now, shallow and quick. Marcus recognized the signs. Emma had looked exactly like that the time she'd gotten separated from him at the beach last summer. The difference was that Emma had been surrounded by people willing to help a crying little girl. This kid was invisible in his difference, and Marcus understood invisibility better than most. He left his change on the counter and walked toward the fountain. The boy's head turned at the sound of approaching footsteps, hope and wariness fighting across his features. Marcus stopped just close enough to be heard clearly but far enough away not to startle him. "Hey there," Marcus said, keeping his voice gentle and steady. "I'm Marcus. Sounds like you're looking for your dad." The relief that flooded the boy's face was immediate and overwhelming. "Yes, sir. We were by the electronics store, and I thought he was right beside me, but when I reached for him..." His voice wavered slightly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I'm Alex Morrison. Even Marcus, who avoided business news like most people avoided root canals, recognized that name. Morrison Technologies was the kind of company that owned half the office buildings downtown. This kid's father probably made more in a month than Marcus earned in a year. But right now, none of that mattered. What mattered was the way Alex's knuckles were white where he gripped his cane, and the way he was fighting to keep his voice steady, and the fact that every adult in this crowded mall had decided that someone else would handle this. "Okay, Alex," Marcus said. "I'm going to help you find your dad. But first, let's get you somewhere quieter where you can think clearly. There's a bench right behind you, about 3 steps back. Want to sit down for a minute?" Alex nodded gratefully and let Marcus guide him to the bench. As they sat down, Marcus noticed the quality of everything the kid wore. The expensive watch, the designer sneakers, the kind of casual clothes that cost more than Marcus's rent. But he also noticed the way Alex's shoulders relaxed slightly, now that he had someone talking to him like he was a person instead of a problem to be solved. "So tell me about your dad," Marcus said. "What's he wearing today? Any idea which direction you came from?" As Alex began to describe his father, Marcus felt something shift inside him, a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in months. For the first time in longer than he could remember, someone needed him. Not as a night shift data processor or a weekend father or any of the diminished roles he'd been playing, but as exactly who he was. Someone who understood what it meant to be lost, and who refused to let anyone face that feeling alone. He had no idea that this moment would be the beginning of everything changing, or that Alex Morrison's father would turn out to be the one person who could offer Marcus something he'd stopped believing he deserved: a second chance. Marcus watched as Alex's father, David Morrison, approached with long, urgent strides, his expensive suit wrinkled from what had clearly been a frantic search. The relief on the man's face was unmistakable, but so was something else. A flash of surprise when he saw who had been helping his son. "Alex, thank God," David breathed, dropping to one knee beside the bench. His hands moved quickly over his son's shoulders, checking for any sign of injury with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to worry about different dangers than most parents. I turned around for 30 seconds to look at a display, and when I looked back, "I'm okay, Dad," Alex said, though his voice still carried traces of the fear that had gripped him 20 minutes earlier. "Marcus helped me. He stayed with me the whole time." David Morrison stood slowly, his attention shifting to Marcus for the first time. Marcus felt the familiar weight of assessment, the way wealthy people looked at service workers, calculating worth and potential threat in the same glance. But there was something else in Morrison's expression, something that looked almost like genuine gratitude. "I can't thank you enough," David said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, confident, the handshake of someone accustomed to closing million-dollar deals. Most people would have just called security and walked away. Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Anyone would have done the same thing. "No," David said firmly. "They wouldn't have. And they didn't." He gestured toward the crowds of shoppers moving past them. "You stayed with him. You made him feel safe. That means everything to me." There was an awkward pause, as both men seemed to realize they were from completely different worlds, brought together by circumstance and about to return to their separate lives. Alex sensed the shift in energy and looked between them with the particular insight that comes from navigating the world through senses other than sight. "Dad," Alex said carefully, "Marcus was telling me about his daughter Emma. She's 8 and she loves art just like I love music. He was buying her supplies for her birthday." David's expression shifted, becoming more personal, more interested. "You have a daughter?" "Yeah," Marcus said, checking his watch and feeling a familiar stab of anxiety. "Actually, I should probably get back to her. She's waiting for me at the food court." "Wait," David said, and something in his tone made Marcus pause. "This might sound strange, but would you mind if we walked with you? I'd like to meet your daughter if that's okay. And honestly," he glanced around the busy mall corridor, "I could use a few more minutes before I have to pretend that losing my son in a crowd didn't just take 10 years off my life." Marcus hesitated. Emma was protective of their time together, especially since the divorce had limited their weekends to carefully scheduled blocks. She didn't like sharing him with strangers, and she definitely didn't like reminders of how different their life was from other people's. But something about the vulnerability in David Morrison's admission made it impossible to say no. "Sure," Marcus said, "but I should warn you, Emma's not always great with new people. She's been through a lot of changes lately." As they walked toward the food court, Alex between them with his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the tile floor, Marcus found himself studying David Morrison out of the corner of his eye. The man was younger than he'd expected, maybe late 30s, with the kind of confident bearing that came from never having to wonder if you belonged somewhere. But there were lines around his eyes that spoke of worry, and the way he stayed close to Alex suggested someone who had learned not to take safety for granted. "How long has Alex been using a cane?" Marcus asked, then immediately worried he'd overstepped some boundary. "Since he was 7, David replied without hesitation. He was born with a degenerative condition that gradually took his sight. The doctor said he'd be completely blind by age 10, so we spent a lot of time preparing. He looked down at his son with unmistakable pride. He's handled it better than I have, honestly. Alex grinned. Dad still bumps into things more than I do. That's because you actually pay attention to where you're going. David shot back, and Marcus was surprised by the easy warmth between them. He'd expected the kind of stiff formality that he associated with wealthy families, but this felt genuine, lived in. They found Emma exactly where Marcus had left her, sitting at a corner table with her friend's family, carefully arranging the remnants of her Happy Meal into elaborate patterns. She looked up as they approached, her dark eyes immediately wary as she took in the strangers accompanying her father. "Em, I want you to meet some new friends," Marcus said, crouching down to her level. "This is Alex, and his dad, Mr. Morrison." Alex got separated from his dad earlier, and I helped him out. Emma studied Alex with the unblinking directness of childhood, taking in the cane and the way he held his head tilted slightly as he listened to the sounds around him. Marcus held his breath, hoping she wouldn't say something that would embarrass them all. "Can you see anything at all?" Emma asked, and Marcus winced. "Emma," he started, but Alex was already smiling. "A little bit of light and dark," Alex said, "but mostly I use my ears and my hands to figure things out. It's like being a detective, except instead of looking for clues, I'm listening for them." Emma's face lit up with interest. "That's actually really cool. I bet you hear things that other people miss." "All the time," Alex agreed. "Like right now, I can tell that someone at the table behind us is drinking a milkshake through a straw, and there's a baby crying near the pretzel stand, and your dad has keys in his left pocket that jingle when he moves." Emma looked at Marcus with amazement. "He's right about the keys. That's like a superpower." Marcus felt some of the tension leave his shoulders as he watched his daughter's natural curiosity override her usual shyness. But he was also acutely aware of David Morrison watching the interaction, and of the contrast between Emma's simple meal and the kind of restaurants this family probably frequented. "Would you like to sit down?" Marcus offered, though the plastic chairs around the food court table looked absurdly inadequate for someone in a $1,000 suit. "Actually," David said, "I was wondering if you'd let me buy everyone ice cream. It's the least I can do. And Alex has been asking to try that new gelato place on the second level." Emma's eyes went wide with excitement, but Marcus felt his stomach drop. Gelato meant expensive, meant the kind of place where a single serving cost more than their entire lunch budget. But before he could politely decline, Emma was already tugging on his sleeve. "Please, Dad? I've never had real gelato before." Marcus found himself caught between his pride and his daughter's obvious excitement. He could see David Morrison understanding the hesitation, and something in the man's expression suggested he recognized the delicate territory they were navigating. "You know what?" David said casually. "Alex has been trying to convince me to get the family sampler platter there for weeks. It's supposed to serve 6 people, but knowing Alex's appetite, we'll probably need help finishing it. Would you mind giving us a hand?" It was gracefully done, Marcus had to admit. A way for David to be generous without making it feel like charity, a family sharing food rather than a wealthy man buying ice cream for strangers. Emma was already bouncing with anticipation, and Alex was nodding enthusiastically. "That sounds great," Marcus said, surprising himself. As they made their way to the gelato shop, Emma walking beside Alex and chattering about her art projects while he described his piano lessons, Marcus found himself walking next to David Morrison in the kind of comfortable silence that usually took years to develop. "She's a great kid," David said quietly. "Thanks. So is Alex. You've done a good job with him." David was quiet for a moment. "It hasn't always been easy. When we first got the diagnosis, I went a little crazy, trying to fix everything, make his life perfect, compensate for what he was losing. It took me a while to realize that what he needed wasn't protection from the world. He needed to know how to navigate it." Marcus nodded, thinking about his own struggles with letting Emma face disappointment and difficulty. "Single parenting? For the past year," David admitted. My ex-wife couldn't handle it. The uncertainty, the constant worry about his safety, the way people look at him sometimes. She said she felt like she was drowning." "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and meant it. "What about you?" 2 years now. Different reasons, but same result." Marcus watched Emma demonstrate something to Alex with animated gestures that he couldn't see but was clearly enjoying anyway. Some days, I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water. But you're doing it, David said. That's what matters. They reached the gelato shop, and Marcus watched Emma's face transform with wonder at the display case full of colorful frozen treats. Alex couldn't see the visual spectacle, but he inhaled deeply and grinned. Definitely the pistachio, he announced, and maybe the dark chocolate, and definitely the strawberry basil. Strawberry basil? Emma wrinkled her nose. That sounds weird. Trust me, Alex said confidently. Sometimes the weird combinations are the best ones. As they settled around a small table with the enormous sampler platter between them, Marcus found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in months. Emma was describing her school's art show to Alex, who was offering suggestions about how to arrange her paintings for maximum impact. David was asking genuine questions about Marcus's work, listening to his answers with the kind of attention that made Marcus remember why he'd once been good at his job. For the first time since his divorce, Marcus felt like he was having a conversation with another adult as an equal, not as someone apologizing for his circumstances or explaining his limitations. It was dangerous territory. This kind of comfort could make a person forget the realities that would reassert themselves the moment they left this artificial bubble of shared ice cream and easy conversation. But as he watched his daughter laugh at something Alex said, her face bright with genuine joy, Marcus allowed himself to enjoy the moment without worrying about what it meant or where it could lead. Sometimes, he thought, it was enough to simply be present for unexpected connections, even when you knew they were temporary. He had no way of knowing that David Morrison was thinking the exact same thing, or that both men were already dreading the moment when they would have to say goodbye and return to their separate worlds. 3 weeks later, Marcus was staring at his phone in disbelief, reading the same text message for the 5th time. It was from David Morrison, and it contained an offer that made no sense whatsoever. Emergency at the office. Regular childcare fell through. Would you be willing to watch Alex for a few hours? We'll pay whatever your usual rate is. Desperate. Marcus set the phone down and rubbed his eyes. He'd been awake for 36 hours straight, pulling a double shift because one of his coworkers had called in sick, and his brain felt like it was wrapped in cotton. But even exhausted, he could recognize that this was crossing some invisible line they'd been carefully avoiding since their encounter at the mall. After the gelato that day, they'd exchanged numbers with the casual promise that maybe the kids could have a playdate sometime. But 3 weeks had passed without either man following through, and Marcus had assumed that whatever connection they'd felt had been a product of unusual circumstances and sugar-induced goodwill. People from David Morrison's world didn't actually become friends with people from Marcus's world. That was just reality. But now David was asking him to watch his son, and the desperation in the message suggested this wasn't some charitable gesture or pity offering. This was a father in trouble, reaching out to someone he trusted. Marcus picked up the phone and called back. Marcus? David's voice was strained, professional composure cracking around the edges. Thank God. I know this is completely out of line, but I'm in a crisis situation here. What's going on? Morrison Technologies is being audited by the SEC. Surprise inspection that started an hour ago. I have to be here to handle it personally, but my usual sitter had a family emergency, and every backup I've called is either busy or not available on short notice. David's voice dropped. I can't leave Alex alone, especially not today. He's been anxious about school stuff lately. And with everything that's happening here, Marcus could hear the exhaustion and stress in David's voice, could picture him pacing some expensive office while trying to solve an impossible problem. Where is he now? With my assistant, but she has her own family to get home to, and Alex barely knows her. He's putting on a brave face, but I can tell he's uncomfortable. David paused. I know it's a huge ask, and I know we don't really know each other that well, but you're the only person I trust with him right now. The words hit Marcus harder than they should have. When was the last time anyone had said they trusted him with something important? When was the last time he'd been someone's first choice instead of their last resort? I can be there in 40 minutes, Marcus heard himself saying. Where should I pick him up? The relief in David's voice was overwhelming. Are you sure? I know you just got off work, and Emma's at her mom's this week. And honestly, I could use the distraction. David gave him the address of Morrison Technologies downtown, And Marcus found himself getting dressed in his cleanest jeans and least wrinkled shirt, trying to look presentable enough for whatever world he was about to enter. The Morrison Technologies building was exactly what Marcus had expected. Gleaming glass and steel reaching toward the sky, the kind of place where everyone wore suits that cost more than his monthly salary. But when he arrived at the 42nd floor, he found Alex sitting in a conference room that looked like something from a movie, staring out windows that offered a view of the entire city. "Marcus?" Alex's head turned at the sound of footsteps, and his face broke into a genuine smile. "Dad said you were coming, but I wasn't sure if you'd actually show up." "Of course I showed up," Marcus said, settling into the chair beside him. "Your dad sounded like he was having the kind of day that makes people question their life choices." Alex laughed. "Yeah, he gets that way when the government people come to look at the company's books. He tries to hide it, but I can always tell when he's really stressed because he forgets to eat and his voice gets all tight." Marcus looked around the conference room, taking in the mahogany table that could seat 20 people, the wall-mounted screens displaying stock prices and financial data, the view that made the rest of the city look like a model train set. "Does it ever feel weird being in a place like this?" "You mean because I can't see it?" "No, I mean because it's so." Marcus searched for the right word. "Important. Powerful. Like decisions made in this room affect thousands of people." Alex considered this seriously. "Sometimes. But mostly it just feels like where my dad works. Like, I know it's a big deal to other people, but to me it's just the place with the really good vending machine on the 35th floor and the security guard who always asks about my piano lessons." Before Marcus could respond, David appeared in the doorway, looking harried and grateful in equal measure. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie loosened, and there were stress lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. "Marcus, I can't tell you how much this means to me," David said, crossing the room in quick strides. "The audit team is going to be here for at least 3 more hours, maybe longer. I know this isn't what you signed up for." "It's fine," Marcus said, and was surprised to realize he meant it. "Alex and I will figure out something to do." David looked between them, seeming to wrestle with something. "Actually, there's something else. The audit team wants to review our community outreach programs, and I'm supposed to present our youth mentorship initiative, but—" He ran a hand through his hair. "The presentation is a disaster. Our head of community relations left last month, and whoever put this together clearly doesn't understand what we're actually trying to accomplish." Marcus frowned. "What kind of youth mentorship? Programs for kids from low-income families, after-school tutoring, job skills training for teenagers. The idea is to provide opportunities for kids who might not otherwise have access to resources or guidance." David's expression was frustrated. "It's a good program in theory, but the presentation makes it sound like charity work designed to make us look good rather than something that actually makes a difference." "Because that's probably what it is," Alex said quietly. Both men looked at him in surprise. "I've heard you on the phone with the board members, Dad. They talk about the mentorship program like it's a tax write-off, not like it's about helping real people. And all the reports I've heard sound like they're written by people who have never actually met the kids they're supposed to be helping." David's face went through several expressions before settling on resignation. "You're not wrong. But the SEC wants to see evidence of genuine community investment, not just corporate charity. And right now, I don't have anything to show them that looks authentic." Marcus found himself thinking about Emma's school, about the kids in their neighborhood who disappeared into their apartments after school because there was nowhere safe to go, about teenagers he saw at the community center who had all the potential in the world but no clear path forward. "What if it actually was authentic?" Marcus said slowly. "What do you mean? I mean, what if instead of presenting some sanitized version of helping underprivileged kids, you presented a program that was actually designed by someone who understands what those kids need?" David stared at him. "Are you volunteering to fix my presentation?" "I'm volunteering to tell you what's wrong with your current approach and what might actually work instead." Marcus felt something stirring in his chest, a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. "I grew up in the kind of neighborhood your program is supposed to serve. I know what it's like to be smart enough to succeed but not have anyone show you how. And I know the difference between programs that change lives and programs that just make donors feel good about themselves." Alex was grinning now. "Dad, you should listen to him. Marcus gets it." David looked around the conference room, at the financial data scrolling across the screens, at the audit team working just down the hall, at his son who was nodding encouragingly at a man he'd met 3 weeks ago in a mall food court. "Okay," David said finally, "but I should warn you, the SEC team wants to see the presentation in 2 hours. And it's not just about showing them paperwork. They want to understand our actual commitment to the community, our long-term vision, our measurable impact." Marcus stood up, adrenaline cutting through his exhaustion. "Then we'd better get started." What followed was the most intense 2 hours of Marcus's professional life. David pulled up the existing presentation on the room's massive screen, and Marcus immediately understood why the audit team would be skeptical. The language was corporate and distant, the goals were vague, and the metrics focused on money distributed rather than lives changed. "This reads like it was written by people who think poverty is a math problem," Marcus said, pointing to a slide about economic disparity reduction. "Kids don't need economic disparity reduction. They need adults who believe in them, safe places to learn, and clear paths to opportunities they can actually achieve." Working together, they rebuilt the presentation from the ground up. Marcus talked about real challenges: transportation barriers, homework help for parents who worked multiple jobs, the need for mentors who came from similar backgrounds and could serve as proof that success was possible. David translated Marcus's insights into business language the audit team would understand, while Alex served as a reality check, pointing out when something sounded too good to be true, or when they were making assumptions about what kids actually wanted. By the time David had to present to the SEC team, they had created something entirely different, a program that acknowledged the complexity of systemic poverty while offering concrete, achievable steps toward meaningful change. More importantly, they had a presenter who could speak authentically about both the challenges and the solutions. Marcus found himself in the unusual position of sitting in on a federal audit, watching David Morrison defend not just his company's community investment, but a vision they had developed together. The SEC team asked hard questions about sustainability, measurability, and genuine impact. David answered them with confidence, but when they pressed for specifics about implementation and community buy-in, he did something that surprised everyone in the room. "I'd like you to hear from my colleague, Marcus Rodriguez," David said. "He's going to be heading up the program development, and he can speak to the practical aspects of what we're proposing." Marcus felt every eye in the room turn to him, these government officials and corporate lawyers and executives, who probably made more in a month than he made in a year. But instead of feeling intimidated, he felt clear. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. "The thing about mentorship programs," Marcus began, "is that they fail when they're designed by people who think they know what kids need, instead of people who actually listen to what kids are asking for." He talked about Emma's friend who was brilliant at math but whose parents couldn't help with homework because they worked nights. About teenagers in his neighborhood who had given up on college not because they weren't smart enough but because no one had ever explained how financial aid actually worked. About the difference between charity and investment, between helping and empowering. When he finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. Then the lead SEC investigator nodded slowly. "This is exactly the kind of community engagement we want to see," she said. "Authentic, sustainable, and clearly designed by people who understand the actual challenges involved." As the audit team packed up their materials, declaring the review successful, Marcus realized that something fundamental had shifted. He wasn't just Marcus Rodriguez, night shift worker and weekend father, anymore. He was someone whose voice mattered, whose experience had value, whose insights could shape programs that affected real lives. But more than that, he had found something he'd thought was lost forever, a sense of partnership with someone who saw his worth and was willing to bet on his potential. David appeared beside him as the last of the officials left, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. "So," David said quietly, "how do you feel about making this official?" 6 months later, Marcus stood at the podium of the Grand Ballroom at the Fairmont Hotel, looking out at an audience of 500 community leaders, educators, and business executives gathered for the annual Youth Development Awards ceremony. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was wearing a suit that cost more than his old monthly rent, addressing people who 6 months ago wouldn't have given him a second glance. The Community Impact Award sat heavy in his hands, its crystal surface reflecting the ballroom lights, but the weight of the trophy was nothing compared to the weight of what it represented: proof that his life had meaning beyond survival, that his experiences had value beyond their pain. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "6 months ago, I was working the night shift at a data processing company, trying to convince myself that being invisible was the same thing as being safe." A ripple of attention moved through the crowd. These kinds of speeches usually started with humble gratitude and moved quickly to corporate talking points. Marcus was doing something different. "I want to tell you about a day that changed everything. A day when I helped a lost child find his father, not because I was particularly heroic or wise, but because I remembered what it felt like to be scared and alone." He found Alex in the audience, sitting at the Morrison Technologies table with his father, both of them beaming with pride. That child was Alex Morrison, and his father David is the CEO of Morrison Technologies. Now, you might think this is a story about a wealthy man taking pity on a struggling single father. But you'd be wrong. Marcus paused, letting his eyes sweep across the faces in front of him. In the back of the room, he spotted Emma sitting with David's assistant. Wearing the dress they'd picked out together, her face glowing with excitement at seeing her father on stage. This is a story about what happens when we stop making assumptions about people based on their circumstances. When we start recognizing that the person who cleans your office might have insights you desperately need. That the woman working 3 jobs might understand efficiency better than any consultant. That the teenager from the wrong side of town might see solutions that escape everyone else. The ballroom had gone completely quiet. Marcus could see phones being lowered as people stopped documenting the event and started actually listening. 6 months ago, Morrison Technologies launched the Bridge program, a youth mentorship initiative that's already changed the lives of over 200 young people in our city. But here's what makes it different from every other corporate community outreach effort. It was designed by the community it serves. Marcus thought about the past 6 months, the whirlwind of transformation that had brought him to this moment. After the SEC audit, David had offered him a position as Director of Community Engagement at Morrison Technologies. The salary was more than double what he'd been making, but more importantly, the work mattered in ways his old job never had. Together, they had built something unprecedented. Instead of creating programs in boardrooms and implementing them in communities, they had started in community centers and schools, listening to what kids actually needed. They had hired mentors who came from the same neighborhoods as the students, who understood that success wasn't just about academic achievement, but about navigating systems that weren't designed with them in mind. The Bridge program works because it's based on a simple premise, Marcus continued. People don't need to be saved. They need to be seen, supported, and given the tools to build their own futures. He looked directly at David, whose expression was a mixture of pride and something deeper. The look of someone who had discovered that giving others opportunities had transformed his own life as much as theirs. "My partner in this work, David Morrison, took a risk when he offered a night shift worker a seat at the executive table. But it wasn't charity. It was recognition that lived experience has value, that the solutions to complex problems often come from the people closest to those problems." The applause was building, but Marcus wasn't finished. This moment had been months in the making, and he needed to say everything he'd come here to say. "I want to read you something," he said, pulling out his phone. "This is a text message I received yesterday from Jasmine Rodriguez. No relation, despite the name. Jasmine is 17, a senior at Lincoln High School, and one of our first Bridge program participants." Marcus had to pause for a moment, emotion threatening to overwhelm him as he remembered the first time he'd met Jasmine. She had been sullen and defensive, convinced that the program was just another way for adults to feel good about themselves while changing nothing meaningful about her circumstances. "Mr. Marcus," he read, his voice growing stronger, "I got accepted to State University with a full scholarship. But that's not even the best part. The best part is that for the first time in my life, I believe I deserve it. Thank you for showing me that my story isn't something to overcome. It's something that makes me stronger. I want to come back and mentor other kids like me, because now I know that where you start doesn't determine where you finish." The ballroom erupted in applause, but Marcus could barely hear it over the sound of his own heartbeat. He thought about Jasmine's journey from that first skeptical meeting to the confident young woman who now served as a peer mentor herself. He thought about the dozens of other students whose lives had been changed, not by handouts but by having adults who believed in their potential. The bridge program has achieved a 92% high school graduation rate among participants. Marcus continued when the applause died down. 87% of our seniors are going on to college or technical training. But those numbers only tell part of the story. He set the award down on the podium and stepped closer to the microphone, abandoning his prepared remarks for something more personal. The real success is in the confidence I see in kids who used to believe they weren't smart enough for college. It's in the leadership skills they develop by mentoring younger students. It's in the way they've learned to advocate for themselves and others. His voice grew passionate, authentic in a way that corporate speeches rarely achieved. These young people aren't success stories because we saved them. They're success stories because we created space for them to save themselves. The standing ovation was immediate and thunderous. Marcus looked out at the sea of faces, many of them visibly moved, and realized that something had fundamentally shifted in how he saw himself. He wasn't the invisible night shift worker anymore, trying to stay small and unnoticed. He wasn't the divorced father apologizing for his circumstances. He was Marcus Rodriguez, and his voice mattered. As the applause continued, Marcus caught sight of Emma jumping up and down with excitement, her face radiant with pride. Beside her, Alex was applauding with the enthusiasm of someone who understood exactly what this moment meant. And at the Morrison Technologies table, David was on his feet with tears in his eyes, applauding not just Marcus's speech but the journey they had taken together. When Marcus finally left the stage, award in hand, he was surrounded by people wanting to shake his hand, share their own stories, and learn more about the bridge program. Business cards were pressed into his palm, invitations extended, opportunities offered. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus was the person everyone wanted to talk to. But the moment that mattered most came later, when the formal reception had wound down and he found himself on the hotel's rooftop terrace with David, Alex, and Emma. The city stretched out below them, lights twinkling like earthbound stars, and Marcus felt the profound satisfaction of knowing he had found his place in the world. "Dad," Emma said, leaning against his side, "that was the best speech ever." Everyone was crying, even the fancy business people. "It was pretty good." Alex agreed with the casual authority of someone who attended enough corporate events to be a reliable critic. "But the best part was watching everyone realize what my dad and I already knew about you." "What's that?" Marcus asked. "That you're the kind of person who makes everything better just by caring enough to try." David moved to stand beside them at the railing, and for a moment they all stood in comfortable silence, looking out over the city that had become home to their unlikely but unshakable friendship. "Marcus," David said quietly, "I have something to tell you. The board approved the expansion proposal. We're taking the bridge program to 4 more cities next year, and they want you to oversee the development." Marcus felt his breath catch. National expansion meant more kids reached, more lives changed, more proof that programs designed with heart and wisdom could work on a scale that mattered. "There's something else," David continued. "They're offering you a position on the board of directors, full voting member, equal voice in company decisions. It's not charity," he added quickly, seeing Marcus's expression. "It's recognition that the company needs your perspective at every level, not just in community programs." Emma looked up at her father with wide eyes. "Does that mean you're going to be a big, important business person now?" Marcus laughed, pulling her closer. "It means I'm going to be the same person I've always been, just with a bigger platform to help kids like the ones in your school." "And better health insurance," Alex added practically, making all the adults laugh. As they prepared to leave the hotel, Marcus realized that the transformation was complete. 6 months ago, he had been a man hiding from his own potential, convinced that his best days were behind him. Tonight, he was someone who had helped create a program that was changing lives across the city, someone whose opinion was sought by people who shaped policy and allocated resources. But more than any professional achievement, he had gained something he'd thought was lost forever when his marriage ended. A family. Not the traditional kind, but something perhaps even more precious. A chosen family built on mutual respect, shared values, and the deep bonds that form between people who have seen each other's true selves and chosen to love what they found. David had found in Marcus not just an early employee, but a partner who challenged him to use his company's resources for genuine good. Alex had found a mentor who understood that his blindness was just one aspect of who he was, not a limitation that defined him. And Emma had gained not just a father figure in David, but proof that friendship could cross any boundary when people cared enough to see past surface differences. As they walked through the hotel lobby, Marcus caught their reflection in the polished marble walls. David in his expensive suit, Alex with his confident stride and ever-present cane, Emma chattering excitedly about the evening's events, and himself, transformed but still recognizably the man who had once been too afraid to hope for anything better than invisibility. The man who had learned that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simple decision to help a lost child find his way home. 2 years later, Marcus stood in the community center gymnasium in East Oakland, watching 17-year-old Miguel Santos adjust the microphone before addressing a room full of potential bridge program participants. The kid who had barely spoken above a whisper when he first joined the program was now confidently explaining to younger students how mentorship had helped him secure a full scholarship to UC Berkeley's engineering program. "The thing about the bridge program," Miguel was saying, "is that it doesn't try to change who you are. It helps you become the best version of yourself." Marcus felt the familiar warmth of pride as he watched Miguel field questions from eager middle schoolers. This was the 4th city where they'd launched the program, and each expansion had brought new proof that their approach worked across different communities and circumstances. Emma, now 10 and serving as the unofficial junior ambassador for the program, raised her hand from the front row. "Miguel, what would you tell kids who think programs like this are just for other people?" Miguel grinned, remembering his own skepticism. "I'd tell them that I used to think the same thing. I thought successful people were just different from me, like they had some secret I'd never figure out. But it turns out the only secret is having people believe in you until you learn to believe in yourself." After the presentation, Marcus found himself surrounded by parents wanting to enroll their children, teachers eager to partner with the program, and community leaders discussing expansion possibilities. The success had exceeded even David's most optimistic projections. But what meant most to Marcus was the transformation he witnessed in individual students. David appeared beside him, having driven down from San Francisco for the launch event. "The mayor's office called," he said quietly. "They want to discuss making this a permanent part of the city's youth development budget." "That's incredible," Marcus replied, though he was still watching Miguel work the room with the natural ease of someone who had learned that his voice mattered. "There's something else," David continued. "Stanford's education department wants to do a case study on our model. They think it could be replicated nationally through university partnerships." Marcus turned to look at his friend and business partner, still sometimes amazed by how naturally they had learned to work together despite coming from such different worlds. National expansion? If we want it. But only if we can maintain the integrity of what makes it work. Across the room, Alex was deep in conversation with a group of students about adaptive technology, his expertise helping them understand that disability didn't mean limitation. At 15, he had become one of the program's most effective peer mentors, his natural empathy and problem-solving skills making him a favorite among younger participants. Emma bounded over, her face flushed with excitement. "Dad, Miguel said he wants to start a bridge program chapter at Berkeley when he gets there. Can we help him figure out how to do that?" "We'll definitely look into it," Marcus promised, ruffling her hair. Emma had grown up alongside the program, attending events and meeting participants, until community engagement felt as natural to her as breathing. She had announced her intention to study social work and help kids like Miguel help other kids. As the evening wound down and families began to leave, Marcus felt the deep satisfaction that came from work that aligned perfectly with his values. The success had brought opportunities he never could have imagined: speaking engagements, consulting offers, invitations to serve on nonprofit boards. But none of that mattered as much as moments like this, seeing young people discover their own potential. David joined him as they watched the last families file out of the gymnasium. "Remember when you thought helping Alex find me in the mall was just a small act of kindness?" Marcus laughed. "I remember thinking I was just killing time until I could get back to Emma. Funny how the smallest decisions can change everything." "Not small," Marcus corrected. "Simple. There's a difference. Choosing to help someone isn't small, it's just simple." Everything else that followed was just us not walking away from the possibilities that choice created. They walked out into the Oakland evening together, Two men whose friendship had grown from chance encounter to genuine partnership to something that felt like family. Behind them, the community center glowed with the warm light of potential realized and dreams taking shape. As they reached their cars, David paused. "Same time next month for the Portland launch." "Wouldn't miss it," Marcus replied. "Though Emma's insisting we add a section about environmental sustainability to the curriculum." "Smart kid. We should listen to her." Marcus grinned. "We always do." Driving home to his house in the hills, the one with the workshop where he and Emma built furniture for program participants, and the garden where David and Alex came for Sunday dinners, Marcus reflected on how completely his life had transformed. Not just the external circumstances, though those changes were remarkable enough, but something deeper had shifted. Something that had to do with understanding his own worth and refusing to accept invisibility as safety. The Bridge program now operated in 8 cities, had mentored over 1,000 young people, and had become a model for community-centered youth development. But its greatest success, Marcus knew, was proving that ordinary people could create extraordinary change when they stopped underestimating each other. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.